Question. Dear Kim, I'd like to ask for your thoughts on something personal. Have you always found it easy to show yourself to the world? No. And when you voiced your opinions, did you ever face reactions that challenged, criticized, or dismissed you? Yes, of course. I live on planet Earth, right? If so, how did you deal with them? I've been a deeply introverted person since childhood. While I've learned to function socially over time, I still carry a deep fear of exposing and expressing my true self. Through my path as an Ascension Master student, I made some progress in overcoming that fear, especially now as we begin the significant 12-year cycle from 2025. I have a playlist where I talk about this coming 12-year cycle. I've taken to heart the Master's guidance that many of us are being called not to hide but to speak up. I made a commitment to express my voice in the world. As part of that commitment, I've started using social media as a space to gradually open myself up to the outside world. Things were going relatively smoothly until I received my first comment that challenged what I had said. It wasn't hostile or offensive. It began with, "I don't mean to be rude," always a bad beginning, and suggested that he would prefer if I avoided saying certain things. I'll comment on that later. Still, the emotional impact of that one comment was much deeper than I expected. Consciously, I tried to brush it off, but unconsciously it shook me. After that, I suddenly felt the urge to retreat from the world again. For about 3 days, I stopped writing and posting altogether, something I had been doing diligently. And even my daily routines and sleep patterns fell apart. It was a familiar sign of my inner state of spiraling downward. I haven't yet fully sat with or processed that emotional reaction, but I've somehow managed to return to the world today. And in doing so, I realize that this tendency that fears opposition and wants to avoid it is a key part of my spiritual journey ahead. That is why I'm reaching out to hear your experience and guidance. When you began showing yourself to the world, especially when speaking of spiritual truth that many in the material world might consider far-fetched, weren't you afraid of how others might respond? Were there times when facing resistance was painful for you? If so, would you be willing to share how you overcame that? I believe I could gain wisdom from your experience. Well, hopefully you can gain an example, because I started out just like you. I was also very introvert. I was not, let's put it this way, what I've seen in many spiritual people, not all, but many spiritual people, is that we do not want to hurt other people's feelings. We do not want to be forceful. We don't want to manipulate people. We don't want to make other people feel bad. I've said in other videos that I always had this sense that the worst thing I could do was hurt other people's feelings and make them feel bad about themselves, like putting them down or teasing them. I remember when as a child I saw other children tease somebody because they were overweight, for example. There was a guy in my parallel class who was overweight, and he was mercilessly teased by some people. I always thought it was really, really rude to do this, and I didn't want to do this myself. Maybe I did it without realizing it, I don't know. But I definitely didn't want to do this. I've seen this in many spiritual people. So you have this reaction here that a person starts out with, "I don't mean to be rude," which of course suggests that he is going to be rude. Otherwise people don't start out this way. But then he suggests that he would prefer if I'd avoided saying certain things. Well, this ties into this. He doesn't want you to say this because this is going to make him feel bad somehow. It's going to threaten his beliefs, make him feel bad about himself, whatever it is. So you are feeling, oh, maybe what I said will hurt other people's feelings. And it ties into this. And so maybe it's not exactly the same for you, but that's certainly the reaction I had when I started putting myself out there. And so to avoid going into too long of a story, because I have talked about this in a couple of other videos actually, what I started doing in the early 1990s, I started realizing that the path, the essence of the spiritual path is resolving psychology, and I started going into therapy. And as a result of going into therapy, I did resolve certain things that made me not as sensitive to other people's opinions. And with the vocabulary I have today, what I would say is that what I have realized is that anytime I have a strong reaction to other people, it comes from a subconscious self, or maybe more than one. So the person is describing here, after that I suddenly felt the urge to retreat from the world again. For about 3 days I stopped writing and posting altogether. Even the sleep patterns were disrupted. That's a very strong reaction, but it can only come from a subconscious self. It's not you that it's reacting. That's the magic of these teachings that the Master has given, that the core of your being is the conscious you, which has, as a reaction to the world, you have created these subconscious selves in the identity, mental, and emotional bodies. And when you are deciding to put yourself on social media, this is the conscious you deciding. You are basically overriding the subconscious selves that made you an introvert most of your life. You're consciously overriding them. But you haven't resolved them yet. So that means that you're consciously putting yourself on social media. But when a reaction comes back that isn't necessarily positive, you're not consciously reacting to it. You're allowing the subconscious selves to take over your reaction. And that's why it's so strong. And so I came to a point where I realized this. I realized that, I didn't have the concept of the subconscious self back then, but I realized that when I have a reaction to other people's reaction to me being out there, it's something in my psychology that isn't resolved. And therefore what I started doing, well, basically you can say, I started putting myself out there in 2002 when I first created the Ask Real Jesus website, and I started publishing books. And so what I decided at that point is that whenever I saw a reaction in myself to other people and what they were doing to me, I would look at myself, my own psychology, and go after it. And that's what I've done ever since. And I still do it. If I see a reaction in myself, like I've described just a few years ago, there was a person I'd known for a long time who got basically pulled into supporting Trump and thinking that Trump was the solution to all of America's problems. And he was quite aggressive for a time in trying to convince me. And I had a reaction to it. And instead of trying to convince him, I just said, okay, let me look at myself. Why do I have this reaction? And so what this all ties into is that a few years ago, we had these teachings from the Ascended Masters that many of us are avatars who are not created to take embodiment on Earth originally. We embodied on natural planets. And on natural planets, you don't have this problem that other people are attacking you or making you feel bad. It's specific to an unnatural planet. So Earth is an unnatural planet. So some of us as avatars volunteered to come, and I explained this in my video about how the world was created, to Earth in the distant past. And when we came to Earth, we were often very shocked by conditions here, and we were often attacked by the fallen beings who deliberately tried to make sure that we couldn't fulfill our mission for coming to Earth. We couldn't threaten them. And they did this by creating a division in our psyche, which the Ascended Master called the birth trauma, which caused us to create what they call the primal self, which was the first self we created in reaction to Earth. Since then, we've created many of these selves. But when I read this question, it's clear to me that the person is an avatar, and the person had this cosmic birth trauma when coming to Earth. I have an entire playlist called Avatar Psychology, and I strongly encourage anybody who resonates with this question to watch that playlist. Because, of course, you can say that at certain surface levels of your subconscious mind, your emotional, mental, and identity mind, you have some specific subconscious selves that are causing you to react. But it's clear to me that something as deep as this goes all the way back to the birth trauma, when you came as an avatar because you came here to have a positive impact on Earth. And the fallen beings did everything they could to make you doubt that you could have a positive impact. And that's why you thought, well, let me not even try because people just get hurt, they get insulted, so let me just withdraw into a little shell and not disturb anybody. And so now the person has decided, as did I, to again go out there, and you know it's going to disturb people, right? Whenever you say something, I mean, you know, I remember I grew up in Denmark. We have Christians in Denmark, but they are not the fundamentalist kind that you have in the United States. So I moved to the United States. And for the first time, I met these fundamentalist Christians. And if you don't believe in their literal interpretation of the Bible, they are enormously threatened by this and offended by this. Just by the fact, you're not attacking them, right? You're not attacking their beliefs. But just by the fact that you don't share their beliefs, they are offended. Their feelings are hurt. And they will want you to avoid saying anything that questions their beliefs, which basically means you can't say anything, right? So what I'm trying to say here is, I made a shift in 2002 when I started putting myself out there. But I hadn't resolved my birth trauma at that time. That was probably in 18, 19, 20 that happened. So I still had to find a way to put myself out there. And part of what I've always done in my mind is I try to look for contradictions or these impossible situations. So I looked at these fundamentalist Christians. I looked at some other people out there, like scientific materialists, for example. And I realized that if you don't want to run the risk that you offend somebody, you cannot say anything. But what I realized was that all of my life, as I said, I didn't want to hurt other people's feelings. And that was because I have a very big respect for other people's free will. But what I suddenly saw one day is, yeah, Kim, you have a great respect for other people's free will, but you don't have the same respect for your free will. And what I realized was, I was so reluctant to hurt other people's feelings that I didn't respect the fact that I'm an embodiment on earth. I have free will on earth, and I have a right to be myself and express myself in what I believe, even if it offends other people. Because I have a right to be here. And so I realized I was not accepting that I have a right to be here. And with today's vocabulary, you can of course say that was a subconscious self that I had created in a past life. But when I came to see that and came to see how illogical it is that I have more respect for other people's free will than I have for my own, I snapped out of it. It's like I let the self die. And so that was a big part of what did it for me, that I realized, well, I have a right to be myself. And it's not that I'm going out of my way to offend other people, but I have a right to express myself. And then I realized another thing. I realized there are some people out there who are constantly looking to be offended by other people so they can attack these people and make them feel bad. And so they themselves can come to feel superior because they put these other people in their place. In other words, they just want to argue with people. So what I realized was that some of these people, they may come across as, I don't mean to be rude, but you shouldn't be saying what you're saying because it offends me. It may seem like they are offended by it, but they're not. You're giving them exactly what they want, something to whine about. Because that's all they want to do, whine about other people instead of looking at themselves and taking responsibility for themselves. And I just simply realized that I can't let myself be stopped by this. Again, then I can't say anything. I've got a right to be who I am and express what I am. And if, it's like the Master say, let the chips fall where they may. If some people got offended, they got offended. But then, of course, I also, as part of this whole thing, I realized that everything that happens is an opportunity for me to look at my own reactions, look at my own psychology. So I looked at this. Do I have a reaction to other people? Okay, what is that I need to look at in my psychology? And then I overcame it. And I started with some more superficial selves and worked my way down, and eventually I got to the whole birth trauma. So I realized that this person who was asking the question, maybe you're not quite ready to look at your birth trauma. So start with some of the more superficial selves, like, do you actually respect your own free will? Do you actually accept that you have a right to be here? And that you have a right to express yourself because you're an embodiment on earth? And then I also realized that um, you look at the past. There are certain societies, and I've always been aware of that. My whole childhood, I was fascinated by this, how civilizations disappear. And I realized that these civilizations disappear because they became closed systems. They didn't interact with the world. They created a downward spiral because they had certain beliefs that were wrong, that were self-destructive, but they were never challenged. So I realized that the only way we grow, personally and even as a group of people, is we are challenged. And what has brought progress to the world compared to 2,000 years ago, people's ideas of how life was they were challenged. So they came to a higher understanding. And so I realized that challenging people isn't a negative. It's the only way to grow. And I realized that I am willing to be challenged. I have been willing to have my beliefs challenged all of my life. So why shouldn't I have a right to challenge other people? Again, you may not directly go after them, but at least you have a right to express your opinion. And if other people are challenged by it, you are not hurting them. You are not violating their free will. You are giving them an opportunity. And maybe that's what you're here to do. Not to choose for them, but to give them an opportunity. This person who didn't want to hear what you were saying and didn't want you to say certain things, you were giving him an opportunity to challenge his own beliefs. If he isn't willing to do it, that's fine. But then he can just stop looking at what you're putting out there. Again, this is another thing I realized, even back when I started in 2002, the internet wasn't nearly as big. There wasn't as much material on there. But there was still plenty of stuff on there. And the nature of the internet is what? You're searching, something pops up, suggested by Google. You click on that website and you start reading it. If you are offended by it, what do you need to do? Well, click off of there and look for some of the other millions of websites that are out there. You are not forcing somebody to find your website and to stay on that website if they are offended by it. One click and they are off. If they choose not to do that, but come back to you with a negative reaction, that's their choice. Why does that mean you have to stop? And then another realization I came to at some point was that there are idiots on this planet. And with idiots, I mean people who have completely closed their minds, who are completely unwilling to look at themselves, and who are constantly projecting that all of the problems in the world are somebody else's fault. They never have to look at themselves. They never have to change. That's what I call an idiot. I know it's an offensive term, but I can't find any other word. And that means I can never satisfy these people. No matter what I say, in other words, I can't say anything if I'm letting these people drive me. But why should I let my life be determined by idiots? And what about the many people who are not idiots? What if there are people out there who are open to what I'm putting out and who could be helped by it? Am I going to let the idiots stop me from helping the people I could help? I mean, who's running my life? Idiots or good people that could be helped by what I'm putting out? So again, you have to play with this. I realize, though, the person is describing that he or she has a very strong reaction, and that comes from the subconscious self, and I think it ultimately comes from the birth trauma. So you won't be really free of this until you get down to that birth trauma. As I said, the Masters are given tools for this. Their book, Healing Your Spiritual Traumas, would probably be the place to start, but other books in that series as well. So you can work with it, but it will take time. But I think it's very courageous that you have started. And you just need to look at it that this is a chance to look at your own reactions, to examine your own reactions, whether there's inconsistencies in your beliefs. And, what you have done here is taken a very important step in your divine plan and in your personal growth. Because if you're just willing to look at your reactions and go after the subconscious selves, you can make tremendous progress in a very short period of time. And you will come to a point, as did I, after some time, you're going to look back at this and say, why was I ever so concerned about this? I'm just expressing myself. And I have a right to do that because I'm an embodiment on this planet. And I have a right to be part of what the Buddha calls the interdependent originations. You see what the Buddha talks about interdependent originations means everything is connected. Right? And that's what the Master is talking about. There's a collective consciousness. We are part of that collective consciousness. It's like you have a piece of cloth. Right? And it's soft. But you can take one corner and you can start raising that corner of the cloth. And in the beginning, it's just a little area you're raising. But eventually, if you keep pulling up, you're going to raise the whole cloth up. And we are here to be part of these interdependent originations. By raising ourselves, by seeking to help others, we are lifting the cloth of the interdependent originations on earth. If we do nothing, we're not lifting. But we didn't come here to do nothing. We came here to raise the cloth. And we do that by raising ourselves and seeking to help others who are open to raising themselves. Not by allowing those who are not open to shut us down before we've even started.